They woke up to the smell of fresh bread in the air. The sun was already lighting the stone streets. Merchants were arranging their stalls. Slaves carried amphorae of wine, and children ran through the narrow alleys laughing as if the world were eternal. It was just another ordinary day in Pompeii, a rich, vibrant, living city that thrived in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. No one looked at the mountain with fear. It was part of the landscape. It had always been there, silent, motionless, seemingly harmless. But beneath the earth, something was already moving. Long before the first tremor, pressure was building in an invisible and relentless way. Shortly before noon, the ground trembled. Some people laughed. Small quakes were nothing new. Then came the sound, a deep, ancient roar, as if the earth itself were splitting in two. People lifted their eyes and saw a black column tearing through the sky, ash rising like a giant tree made of smoke and fire. The day began to darken, birds fled, animals panicked. And for the first time, fear appeared. Within hours, the air would become impossible to breathe. The streets would disappear beneath burning stones. The sky would fall over the city. And thousands would realize too late that this was not just another ordinary day. It was the last. Today, we return to August 24th, 79 AD to relive minute by minute the final hours of Pompeii. Because some cities do not disappear slowly. They are erased all at once. In 79 AD, Pompeii was one of the most prosperous cities in the Roman world. Near the Bay of Naples, it thrived as a center of trade, pleasure, and ambition. Its streets echoed with merchants negotiating prices, politicians debating in the forum, and families gathering beneath fresco-painted ceilings. Wealth flowed through the city from every corner of the empire, and life moved with confidence and certainty. The Roman Empire stood strong under Emperor Titus. Ships arrived daily carrying grain, wine, olive oil, and exotic goods from distant provinces. Public baths steamed with conversation, taverns overflowed with laughter. And construction crews continued repairing buildings damaged by a powerful earthquake 17 years earlier. A reminder that the ground beneath them had once shaken violently. Still, most believed the danger had passed. Mount Vesuvius had not erupted in living memory. To the citizens of Pompeii, it was simply part of the horizon, green, silent, almost beautiful. Vineyards covered its slopes, farmers cultivated its fertile soil, and children grew up playing in its shadow without fear. Yet deep beneath the mountain, pressure had been building for centuries. Magma was rising, gas was accumulating. And on the morning of August 24th, while the city carried on as usual, the mountain was approaching its breaking point. On the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, Pompeii woke beneath a flawless blue sky. The air was already warm, carrying the promise of another bright Mediterranean day. No one looked at the mountain with fear. Mount Vesuvius stood on the horizon as it always had, green, silent, familiar. It was part of the landscape, not a threat, but a presence so constant it had become invisible to those who lived beneath it. The streets stirred before sunrise. Wooden shutters creaked open along narrow stone roads marked by the deep grooves of countless cart wheels. Light spilled into alleyways as bakers fed their ovens and merchants arranged olives, figs, and wine amphorae for the day's trade. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the city, blending with dust and sea air. Voices overlapped in confident negotiation, filling the morning with ordinary purpose. Pompeii was prosperous, tightly connected to trade routes stretching across the Mediterranean. Ships arrived through nearby waters carrying grain from Egypt, oil from distant provinces, and wine from Hispania. Wealth flowed steadily into the city, reinforcing its sense of permanence. The Roman Empire stood strong, and Pompeii reflected that strength in its architecture, its commerce, and its ambition. Life moved with rhythm and assurance. The amphitheatre prepared for spectacle, where crowds would gather to witness violence and drama beneath the open sky. In the bathhouses, steam rose in lazy spirals as conversations echoed off marble walls. Political slogans painted in red decorated aging plaster, reminding citizens of elections and influence. Time here was measured in market days and festivals, not in fear. 17 years earlier, the earth had shaken violently. A powerful earthquake had cracked walls and toppled columns, leaving scars across the city, but Pompeii rebuilt. Stone by stone, column by column, repairs became symbols of resilience rather than warnings. The tremors faded into memory, and the ground's anger was reduced to inconvenience. The earth had grumbled before, and life had continued. Children ran between columns in shared courtyards, their laughter echoing through sunlit atriums. Slaves carried water from public fountains, bronze basins shimmering in the morning light. Wealthy villas displayed intricate mosaics and vivid frescoes, while modest homes clustered around communal spaces. It was a city of order, confidence, and movement, a place that believed deeply in its own continuity. Above it all, vineyards covered the slopes of Vesuvius. Farmers cultivated its fertile volcanic soil, harvesting grapes that fed the local economy. The mountain gave more than it took, or so it seemed. Generations had grown up playing in its shadow without fear. To them, it was scenery, almost beautiful, a backdrop to ordinary life. Yet, deep beneath the surface, far below the vineyards and stone foundations, pressure had been building for centuries. Magma rose slowly through fractured rock. Gas accumulated in expanding chambers. The mountain was not sleeping. It was preparing. Forces invisible to the eye pressed upward in silence, tightening like a clenched fist beneath the earth. On that morning, nothing in the sky betrayed what was coming. No smoke pierced the horizon. No ash drifted across the sun. Only warmth, only light, only the illusion of stability. The soundscape remained unchanged. Footsteps, laughter, the rumble of wooden carts against stone. Pompeii trusted what it could see. And what it saw was peace, a blue sky, a green mountain, a city alive with certainty. By midday, that certainty would begin to fracture. But in these early hours, Pompeii belonged entirely to the living, unaware, unafraid, and unprepared for the moment when the horizon itself would break. The morning advanced quietly over Pompeii, and for a time the rhythm of the city remained unchanged. Merchants negotiated prices beneath striped awnings while bakers pulled fresh loaves from stone ovens. Children chased one another between columns and narrow alleyways. Servants crossed the streets carrying baskets, folded cloth, and water jars as the city moved through another ordinary morning. Above the rooftops, Mount Vesuvius remained still against the bright Mediterranean sky. Its green slopes looked calm and familiar, just another part of the landscape. Nothing in its shape or color suggested danger. For generations the mountain had stood there in silence, watching over the city without threatening it. Yet, beneath the streets, subtle signals had already begun to ripple through the ground. Small tremors passed through the stone foundations of houses and shops. The movement was so faint that many citizens barely noticed. A cup rattled softly on a table. Dust slipped from a wooden beam in a quiet storeroom. In the marketplace, a stack of amphorae shifted slightly, knocking together with a dull ceramic sound. A merchant paused, glanced at the jars, then continued his conversation. Earthquakes were not unusual in this region. The ground around Pompeii had trembled many times before. 17 years earlier, a violent earthquake had struck the region and damaged much of the city. Walls had cracked, temples had lost columns, and roofs had collapsed across several districts. The memory of that disaster still lingered in the repaired buildings scattered through Pompeii. But time had softened that memory. Reconstruction had transformed destruction into renewal. New walls replaced old ones, columns were raised again, and streets regained their order. What had once been terrifying slowly became a distant story told by older residents. Because of this history, the small tremors of the morning did not cause panic. Most people dismissed them as ordinary movements of the earth. Some citizens paused briefly when they felt the vibration beneath their feet. But soon conversations resumed and work continued. In the countryside beyond the city, however, animals had begun to behave strangely. Horses shifted nervously in their stalls, dogs barked without clear reason. Birds lifted suddenly from vineyards, circling above the fields before settling again. Inside Pompeii, a slightly stronger tremor rolled beneath the streets. Wooden doors rattled in their frames, and a ceramic bowl slid from a kitchen table, shattering on the floor. The movement lasted only seconds, leaving behind murmurs and curious glances. But far beneath Mount Vesuvius, pressure continued to rise. Magma pushed upward through fractured rock, while trapped gases expanded inside growing chambers. The mountain was no longer quiet. It was gathering strength for the moment when silence would break. By late morning, Pompeii was alive with activity. The sun climbed higher above the city, warming the stone streets and tiled roofs. Merchants called out to passing customers, while carts rolled through the narrow roads carved with deep wheel tracks. Nothing in the rhythm of daily life suggested that the city stood on the edge of catastrophe. In the Forum, citizens gathered beneath tall columns to discuss politics, trade, and the news arriving from distant provinces. Messengers carried letters across the square while officials moved between administrative buildings. The heart of Pompeii beat with confidence, reflecting the strength and stability of the Roman world. Near the bathhouses, steam drifted lazily into the air as visitors entered and left the warm chambers. Conversations echoed against marble walls while water flowed through carefully engineered channels. The baths were more than places of washing, they were centers of social life, where friendships, alliances, and rumors circulated freely. Along the streets, painted advertisements and political slogans covered sections of plaster walls. Candidates seeking office had left their messages in red lettering, urging citizens to support them in upcoming elections. The city's public life was visible everywhere, written directly onto the surfaces of its buildings. Beyond the city gates, farmers continued their work among the vineyards and fields. The volcanic soil around Vesuvius was rich and fertile, producing crops that sustained the region's economy. Workers moved between rows of vines, unaware that the mountain above them was changing in ways no one could yet see. Shortly before midday, another tremor passed through the ground. It was stronger than those earlier in the morning, strong enough to make several citizens pause where they stood. A few roof tiles slipped from buildings, clattering onto the streets below. Dust rose briefly into the air before settling again. Inside homes and shops, objects shifted on shelves. Bronze lamps swayed slightly from their hooks. Some people stepped outside, scanning the streets with uncertain expressions. Yet the shaking stopped as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind only murmurs and uneasy glances. Many residents shrugged off the disturbance. Earthquakes had become part of life in this region. For years, Pompeii had experienced occasional tremors without serious consequence. The memory of destruction had faded, replaced by confidence in the city's resilience. But deep beneath the mountain, the pressure continued to intensify. Gas-rich magma forced its way upward through narrow fractures in the Earth's crust. Each movement added more strain to the rock above, pushing the volcanic system closer to a breaking point. Above ground, the sky remained clear and bright. The streets of Pompeii filled once more with voices, footsteps, and the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Yet somewhere beneath the vineyards and stone foundations, the forces preparing to erupt were nearing their final moment of restraint. Shortly before noon, the rhythm of Pompeii began to change. Another tremor rolled beneath the city, stronger than those felt earlier that morning. Walls vibrated softly, and wooden shutters tapped against stone frames. Conversations paused in the streets as merchants, travelers, and residents briefly looked around, unsure whether to ignore the movement or take it seriously. For a moment, silence spread through the marketplace. A mule pulling a small cart stopped suddenly as its driver tightened the reins. A baker stepped outside his shop and looked down the street. People exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that the tremor felt different from the small vibrations that had passed earlier in the day. Then the earth struck again, harder this time. The ground jolted sharply beneath the city. Tiles slid from rooftops and shattered across the stone roads. Dust fell from wooden beams and plaster walls. A few citizens stumbled as they tried to keep their balance while the tremor rolled through the streets of Pompeii. Some residents stepped away from buildings, moving instinctively toward open areas. Others tried to calm themselves, laughing nervously or shrugging the moment aside. Pompeii had endured earthquakes before, and most people believed this was simply another passing disturbance beneath the earth. But far above the city, Mount Vesuvius was no longer quiet. Deep within the mountain, rising pressure forced magma and gas toward the surface. The summit, silent for generations, had begun to fracture. Invisible forces were preparing to break through rock that had held them for centuries. Without warning, the mountain erupted. A violent explosion tore through the summit of Vesuvius, blasting rock, ash, and gas into the sky with enormous force. A thunderous roar rolled across the countryside and echoed over the Bay of Naples like distant thunder that refused to fade. A massive column of dark ash surged upward from the mountain. It climbed rapidly into the sky, growing taller and wider as it rose. Within minutes it towered above the region, expanding into a vast shape that spread outward like the crown of a giant tree made of smoke and dust. Citizens across Pompeii lifted their eyes toward the horizon. At first many struggled to understand what they were seeing. The column continued to rise, twisting and spreading as winds pushed the ash cloud higher into the atmosphere. Soon, the bright Mediterranean sky began to fade behind drifting grey clouds. Fine particles of ash started falling slowly through the air. At first the flakes were light, settling quietly on rooftops, streets, and shoulders of people standing in confusion. Then the first stones fell from the sky. Small pieces of pumice began striking rooftops and courtyards with hollow impacts. Citizens raised their arms to shield their heads as the falling debris multiplied. The calm morning of Pompeii was gone, and the mountain above them had finally awakened. By early afternoon, the sky above Pompeii had changed completely. The towering column of ash from Mount Vesuvius spread across the sky like a dark canopy. Daylight dimmed as grey clouds expanded over the region. What had begun as curiosity slowly turned into fear as the eruption continued to grow. Pumice stones now fell constantly across the city. At first they were small, bouncing across rooftops and streets. But soon larger fragments began crashing down with heavy impacts. The noise echoed through the narrow streets as debris struck tiles, wood and stone. Citizens rushed through the streets carrying what they could. Some wrapped cloth around their heads to protect themselves from the falling stones. Others pulled children close while searching for shelter beneath arches, courtyards and stronger buildings. Inside many homes, families tried to gather supplies. Oil lamps were lit as daylight faded behind the thickening ash cloud. Fine dust drifted through open atriums and settled across tables, floors and furniture. Roofs began to groan under the growing weight of falling pumice. Some structures held firm, but others started to weaken. Wooden beams creaked as stones continued to pile higher with every passing minute. In the streets, movement became slower and more difficult. Ash and pumice already covered the ground, forcing citizens to push through rising layers of debris. Each step stirred clouds of grey dust into the darkening air. The sky continued to darken until the city resembled twilight. Many citizens could no longer see the mountain clearly, only the massive shadow of the eruption cloud spreading overhead. Thunder rolled inside the eruption column above Vesuvius. Lightning flashed through the towering ash cloud, illuminating the sky for brief seconds before darkness returned. Fear spread quickly through Pompeii. Some citizens attempted to flee the city, moving toward the gates despite the rain of falling stone. Others remained inside their homes, hoping the eruption would soon weaken. But the mountain showed no sign of stopping. Ash continued to fall, roofs continued to strain, and the once vibrant city slowly disappeared beneath a growing blanket of volcanic debris. Pompeii was being buried while its people struggled to survive the longest afternoon of their lives. By late afternoon, Pompeii had almost disappeared beneath layers of ash and pumice. The streets that had once echoed with merchants and laughter were now buried under rising grey debris. Walking through the city had become exhausting. Every step sank into loose volcanic stone while the air grew thicker and harder to breathe. Many citizens still searched desperately for escape. Small groups pushed toward the city gates, covering their faces with cloth to filter the ash-filled air. Visibility had dropped dramatically. The sky above Pompeii had turned into a dark ceiling of swirling volcanic clouds. Inside homes and courtyards, families gathered together, hoping their walls would protect them from the falling stones. Oil lamps flickered in rooms where daylight no longer reached. Outside, the constant rain of pumice continued without pause. Throughout the evening, roofs across the city began collapsing under the immense weight of accumulated debris. Clay tiles shattered as wooden beams snapped. Entire sections of houses crumbled, sending clouds of dust and ash into the already suffocating air. Then, during the night, the eruption entered its most deadly phase. The towering column above Vesuvius began to collapse under its own weight, sending massive pyroclastic flows racing down the slopes of the mountain at terrifying speed. These superheated clouds of gas, ash, and rock moved faster than any person could run. They surged across the countryside, destroying everything in their path. Vineyards vanished beneath burning ash. Farmhouses disappeared in seconds. When the first pyroclastic surge reached Pompeii, it swept through the streets like a silent storm of fire, and ash temperatures soared instantly, and the air itself became lethal. Those still inside the city had no time to escape. In a matter of moments, Pompeii was overcome. Streets, houses, temples, and markets vanished beneath thick waves of volcanic material. The vibrant city that had lived beneath the shadow of Vesuvius was suddenly frozen in time. Ash continued to fall through the night, sealing the ruins beneath meters of hardened debris. Silence slowly replaced the chaos of the eruption. By morning, Pompeii no longer existed as a living city. Nearly 2,000 years later, the buried streets of Pompeii would be uncovered again, revealing the final moments of an ancient world. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius had erased a city in a single day, but it also preserved its story forever beneath the ash.